The nameplate said, "Dad by obligation." 7 hours of polishing my dress shoes, 40 years of calluses on my hands, and a lifetime of choosing to stay reduced to 3 dismissive words. I stood motionless at the wedding reception table, my carefully wrapped gift in hand, staring at this elegant mockery of my life's most meaningful role. Around me, the country club bustled with preparations for what the Drexlers called the social event of the season. Not one person noticed the 68-year-old man in his one good suit, discovering how little his sacrifice meant to his new in-laws. They mistake patience for weakness, labor for inferiority, and a father's quiet dignity for something they can diminish with a nameplate. By tomorrow, they'll understand how wrong they've been. I straightened my tie, tucked away my hurt behind determined eyes, and stepped back into the wedding preparations. Silas Matthews stood before his bathroom mirror, carefully straightening the collar of his dress shirt. The modest home around him was silent except for the ticking of his father's clock in the hallway. Everything was in its place. Tools in the workshop, organized with precision, kitchen spotless, and now his one good suit, pressed and ready for tomorrow. He ran a hand over his silver hair, cut just yesterday by Eleanor. "You need to look your best," his sister had insisted. "It's not every day your daughter gets married." Not every day indeed. 28 years since Maria had walked out, leaving him with 3-year-old Ilara, and a note explaining she wasn't meant to be a mother. 28 years of parent-teacher conferences attended alone, of working days as a maintenance supervisor and nights cleaning office buildings, of saving every possible penny for Ilara's education. The phone rang, breaking his reverie. Ilara's name appeared on the screen. "Dad, just checking that everything's set for tomorrow." Her voice carried the same gentle determination it had since childhood. "The rehearsal dinner went well?" "It was fine, sweetheart," he said, not mentioning how the Drexlers had seated him at the far end of the table, away from the immediate family. "Are you happy? That's all that matters to me." A slight hesitation. It's all happening very quickly. The Drexlers have taken over most of the planning." "That's natural," Silas replied, though something in her tone concerned him. "They want to celebrate their son." "I suppose," she said. "Dad, thank you for everything, for always being there." After they hung up, Silas returned to polishing his shoes. The reflection of light on the worn leather reminded him of all the school performances he'd attended in these same shoes, all the graduations, all the moments large and small that built a life. Tomorrow would be another such moment, another memory to treasure. Yet something in Ilara's voice left him uneasy. The Oakmont Country Club gleamed in the morning sun, its manicured grounds stretching in every direction. Silas parked his meticulously maintained but 15-year-old sedan in the visitor lot and walked toward the main entrance. He'd arrived early to help with any last-minute preparations, knowing Ilara would appreciate his support. As he approached the grand double doors, Victoria Drexler emerged with the wedding planner, both carrying tablets and discussing flower arrangements. Victoria glanced at him with momentary confusion. "Mr. Matthews, the service entrance is around the back," she said, gesturing vaguely to the side of the building. "I'm here to help with the wedding preparations," Silas explained politely. "I'm the father of the bride." "Oh, of course." Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How conscientious of you to arrive early. Most parents just show up for the ceremony." The wedding planner, a young woman named Melissa, gave him a small smile that contained a hint of apology. Inside, Richard Drexler was instructing staff about the champagne service. He turned when Silas entered, extending a hand that barely connected before withdrawing. "Matthews, good to see you involved, though I assure you we've covered all the expenses." His tone suggested this was a kindness rather than an expectation. "We wouldn't expect you to stretch your budget for something of this scale." "I appreciate that," Silas replied evenly. "But I've been saving for Ilara's wedding since she was a little girl. I'd like to contribute." Richard waved his hand dismissively. "Unnecessary. The Drexlers take care of their own, and Ilara is about to become one of us." From across the room, Silas noticed James Drexler, his future son-in-law, speaking with groomsmen. "And her father's just some janitor," drifted clearly across the space. "Mom's mortified, but what can you do? The patents are worth millions." Silas felt his back stiffen. Maintenance supervisor at Westside Medical Center for 30 years wasn't just some janitor, but the distinction wouldn't matter to people like the Drexlers. What concerned him more was the casual mention of patents, something Ilara had been working on in her biotech research. Melissa approached him quietly. "Mr. Matthews, would you like to see where you'll be seated for the reception?" Her kindness was evident, but as she showed him the family table arrangement, he noticed his place was at the far end, separated from Ilara by the entire Drexler family. "Is this final?" he asked. "Mrs. Drexler was very specific about the arrangement," Melissa replied, not meeting his eyes. The porch swing creaked gently as Silas pushed against the weathered boards of his front porch. The evening air carried the scent of his neighbor's roses, and in the distance the city lights outlined the hills where the Drexler estate stood, a reminder of the different worlds they inhabited. "They probably didn't mean anything by it," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Rich people have their own way of doing things." Eleanor sat beside him, her gray hair pulled back in her usual practical style. As his younger sister and Ilara's honorary aunt, she'd been his support system through every challenge of single parenthood. "The way they looked at you, Silas," she said, shaking her head, "that wasn't just awkwardness. That was dismissal." "It's their world, not mine," he replied. "What matters is Ilara's happiness." "Is she happy, though?" Eleanor asked pointedly. "You said yourself she sounded uncertain." Silas sighed, watching a moth circle his porch light. "This day isn't about me. I can overlook a few thoughtless comments. Remember when that teacher suggested Ilara might be too ambitious given her background?" Eleanor said suddenly. "You didn't overlook that. You marched into that school and quietly, respectfully, made sure it never happened again. That was different. That affected Ilara. And you don't think how they treat you affects her." Eleanor's voice softened. "Silas, you've spent your life being the strong, silent type, taking night shifts for her college fund, attending every science fair, building that lab table in the garage when she got interested in biology." She reached over and squeezed his hand. "You built something in Ilara that money can't buy. Don't let them convince either of you otherwise." As the swing rocked gently, Silas considered his sister's words. Perhaps he needed to pay closer attention to patterns, not isolated incidents. "I'll keep my eyes open," he promised finally. "For Ilara's sake." "For both your sakes," Eleanor corrected. "Your dignity matters too, brother." The maintenance corridors of Drexler corporate headquarters ran like veins behind the gleaming public spaces. Silas moved efficiently through them, coveralls zipped over his clothes, tool belt secure around his waist. Taking this fill-in shift for a friend had seemed serendipitous, a chance to see the company his future son-in-law's family ran. What he'd observed over 6 hours had been illuminating. 3 separate custodial workers had been reprimanded for being visible when executives passed. The cafeteria staff served executives with deference, while employee meals were clearly of lower quality. Most telling was the state of the employee restrooms compared to the executive facilities, one neglected, one palatial. Now, as Silas repaired an electrical outlet in the executive conference room, the board meeting on the other side of the partially open door caught his attention. "Cut the health benefits again," Richard Drexler was saying. "They should be grateful to have jobs at all in this economy." "The maintenance staff has been requesting safety equipment for months," a woman's voice countered. "Which eats into profitability," Richard replied dismissively. "My family didn't build this company by coddling the help." Later, while emptying executive waste bins, Silas found discarded drafts of wedding materials. The final program listed the groom's parents with full titles and accomplishments. His own entry read simply, "Father of the bride." No name, no acknowledgement of his existence beyond his biological function. The seating chart had been revised 3 times, each version moving him further from the main family table. A note in elegant handwriting read, "Keep certain elements contained to East Section." As he finished his shift, a document caught his eye, partially visible in a recycling bin. The letterhead showed Ilara's company logo, BioCore X, with the words "Acquisition Target" highlighted. Below it, a valuation of her patent portfolio and the notation, "Marriage secures intellectual property rights." Silas carefully took a photo with his phone before replacing the document exactly as he'd found it. The pattern was becoming clear. This wasn't about isolated incidents of disrespect. This was systematic. "They've always been that way," Mr. Grayson said, stirring his coffee at Mason's diner, where he and Silas had met for breakfast. The retired high school science teacher had been instrumental in nurturing Ilara's talent years ago. "When their son was in my class, Richard Drexler tried to have me fired for giving the boy a B+. The diner hummed with morning activity. Waitresses greeted Silas by name, and the cook had prepared his usual order without asking. Here, in his community, Silas was known and respected. "I wondered if I was being too sensitive," Silas admitted. "You?" Mr. Grayson laughed. "In 30 years, I've never known you to overreact to anything. You're the most measured man I know." He leaned forward. "The Drexlers donated the new science wing, made sure everyone knew it, then tried to influence grades, curriculum, even teacher hiring. They see everything as transactional. Their money buys influence and deference. And now their son is marrying my daughter," Silas said quietly. "Who was always my most promising student," Mr. Grayson replied firmly. "Did you know the Drexlers have been taking credit in their social circles for Ilara's success, implying their connections and influence got her where she is?" Silas felt a flicker of indignation. She earned every opportunity through her own merit, working through undergraduate, securing that research grant for graduate school. "While you work double shifts to cover her rent," Mr. Grayson finished. "I remember." "The Drexlers see the world differently, Silas. To them, people like us exist to serve their needs and ambitions." "People like us?" Silas asked. "People who work with their hands, people who earn their place rather than inheriting it." Mr. Grayson's eyes were kind, but serious. "Be careful. If they're treating you this way before the wedding, consider what happens after, when they believe they have permanent connection to Ilara." Silas nodded slowly. "I appreciate your perspective. It helps to know I'm not imagining things." "Far from it," the older man said. "And Silas, Ilara knows her own worth because you taught her to. Don't forget that." The Drexler home office exuded power. Dark wood, leather chairs, and family photographs displaying 3 generations of wealth and influence. None, Silas noted, included Ilara, despite months of engagement. Richard sat behind his massive desk while Victoria perched on a leather settee, both watching Silas with the slightly impatient expression of busy people humoring an interruption. "I appreciate you making time," Silas began, seated in a chair that positioned him lower than both Drexlers. "I wanted to discuss some concerns about the wedding arrangements." "Concerns?" Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Everything is top quality, I assure you. We've spared no expense." "It's not about the expense," Silas said carefully. "It's about inclusion. I've noticed that I'm being marginalized in the proceedings. The seating arrangement, the program, even how I'm addressed." Richard sighed impatiently. "You're being too sensitive, Matthews. This is how these events are handled in our circles." "I understand different customs," Silas continued, maintaining his calm. "But as Alara's father—" "We're just trying to give Alara the wedding she deserves," Victoria interrupted, her tone patronizing. "Surely you want that for her. After all, this will be the most significant day of her life, joining a family like ours." The implication hung in the air, that the Drexlers were doing Alara a favor by accepting her, and by extension, doing Silas a favor by tolerating his presence. "Alara deserves respect," Silas said evenly, "as does her family." Richard leaned forward. "Let's be practical, Matthews. This merger, this marriage, represents a significant advancement for your daughter. Our connections, our name. These open doors that would otherwise remain closed to someone from her background." The door opened before Silas could respond, and James Drexler entered, barely acknowledging Silas's presence. "Dad, the lawyers called about those liability waivers for the maintenance staff," he said, then glanced at Silas. "Oh, are we dealing with staff complaints now?" "Mr. Matthews has concerns about the wedding," Victoria said with a dismissive wave. "Nothing important. We're simply trying to maintain appropriate standards," Richard added. "Some people struggle to understand the importance of keeping certain people in their proper place at such events." Silas stood slowly, his dignity intact despite their attempts to diminish him. "I see this conversation won't be productive. Thank you for your time." As he turned to leave, he caught sight of a folder on Richard's desk, open to reveal a document with the BioCoreX logo and the heading "Proposed Acquisition Strategy." Next to it lay what appeared to be Ilara's research summary, with her key findings highlighted. The pieces were connecting in ways that chilled him. This wasn't just about social standing. There was something much larger at stake. The wedding venue glowed with morning light, transformed by flowers and ribbons into something from a fairy tale. Silas arrived 3 hours early, as he'd promised Alara, carrying his carefully wrapped gift, a hand-carved wooden jewelry box containing her grandmother's pearls. Staff bustled around, putting final touches on decorations and table settings. The Drexler family moved through the space like royalty, approving details, directing changes, accepting deference as their due. No one seemed to notice Silas as he made his way to the family table to place his gift. That's when he saw it. Elegant place cards marked each seat: Mr. Mrs. Richard Drexler, James Drexler, Dr. William Drexler, and guest. And there, at the furthest edge of the family table, Dad by obligation. Not Silas Matthews, not father of the bride, but Dad by obligation, as if his 28 years of devoted parenting had been merely a duty to be discharged, not a life built from love and choice. His hand trembled slightly as he set down his gift beside the nameplate. Images flashed through his mind. Nights spent helping with science projects, parent-teacher conferences attended alone, working through Christmas holidays to afford college application fees, standing proudly at her graduations, reduced to obligation. A soft laugh from behind had him turning. Victoria Drexler stood with her sister, both glancing his way before exchanging knowing smiles. Nearby, James Drexler huddled with groomsmen, their voices carrying just enough. "Convinced her to sign the intellectual property agreement yesterday," James was saying. "Once we're married, her patents transfer to Drexler Biotech. Dad's already planning the announcement." "And she agreed to that?" one asked. James smirked. "She trusts me. Besides, he's just the janitor who happened to be her father. We're her real family now." Silas felt something shift inside him. Not just anger, though that was present, but a crystallization of purpose. This wasn't merely about disrespect to him. This was about Ilara's future, her work, her autonomy. For 28 years, he had prioritized her well-being above his own pride. That hadn't changed, but for the first time, he saw clearly that protecting her might require more than quiet dignity. It might require action. Silas found a quiet corner of the venue's garden, away from the increasing activity inside. A stone bench beneath a blooming magnolia provided momentary sanctuary. His hands, still strong from decades of physical work, were clasped tightly together as he processed what he'd seen and heard. The initial shock had passed, replaced by a sequence of emotions he worked through methodically. Hurt came first, deep and personal. Then anger, steady and controlled. Finally, a clarity that felt like emerging from fog into sharp sunlight. He pulled out his wallet, weathered leather soft with age, and looked at the photo he always carried. Ilara at her college graduation, her smile triumphant. He remembered his father's words, spoken when Silas was just a boy. "Your dignity isn't given by others, it's maintained by you." He had allowed small disrespects to slide, believing they affected only him. The nameplate, however, represented something more insidious. If the Drexlers could so casually dismiss 28 years of devoted parenting, what else might they dismiss? Ilara's independence, her accomplishments, her right to control her own work. The pattern was clear now. The comments about her patents, the acquisition documents, the intellectual property agreement James had mentioned. They weren't just acquiring a daughter-in-law, they were acquiring her scientific breakthroughs. "There you are." Eleanor's voice broke into his thoughts as she found him in the garden. She took one look at his face and sat beside him. "What happened?" "My nameplate at the reception. It says, 'Dad by obligation.'" Eleanor's sharp intake of breath told him she understood immediately. "Are those entitled, heartless?" She stopped herself. "What are you going to do?" That was the right question. Not how he felt, but what action he would take. Eleanor had always understood him. "I'm going to protect my daughter," he said simply, "and myself." "How?" she asked, studying his expression. "Silas, I know that look." "With the truth," he replied, "and with planning I've already set in motion." Silas straightened his tie in the small dressing room assigned to him. Outside, he could hear the increasing activity as guests began to arrive. His phone buzzed with a text from Ilara. "Need to see you before ceremony. Meet in bride's room in 10 minutes?" He responded with a simple, "Yes," then methodically checked the inside pocket of his suit jacket, where several documents were securely stored. The photo of the acquisition strategy, his own notes from the maintenance shift, and a business card from Professor Jenkins with a phone number circled in red. Taking out his phone, he dialed that number. "Jenkins here," came the crisp response. "It's Silas. It's worse than we thought. They've had Ilara sign an intellectual property agreement, and they've already planned the acquisition announcement." A pause on the line. "That's illegal if she wasn't informed of their interests." We have enough to move forward immediately. Is everything in place for tomorrow morning? Silas asked. Yes. The regulatory filing is ready, and board members have been quietly contacted. Just give the word. Silas thought of the nameplate, of the dismissive comments, of the documents revealing the Drexlers' true intentions. It's time to implement, have everything ready for tomorrow morning. And Alara, is she prepared? Jenkins asked. I'll know soon, Silas replied. But she's her father's daughter. She sees more than people realize. After ending the call, Silas took a deep breath. The confrontation ahead would require everything he'd taught Alara about standing firm with dignity. This wasn't about revenge for personal slights. It was about consequences for exploitation and dishonesty. He glanced at his watch. Time to meet Alara and discover if they were truly aligned in what needed to be done, for both their dignities. The bride's preparation room was a flurry of activity when Silas arrived, but at Ilara's quiet request, her bridesmaids and the makeup artist stepped out for a father-daughter moment. As the door closed, Ilara locked it and turned to face him. She was breathtaking in her wedding gown, but her eyes held the same determined expression he recognized from every significant decision in her life. They don't know, she said without preamble, spreading documents across the vanity table. They have no idea what we've been building. Silas moved closer to examine the papers, financial statements, corporate filings, shareholder documentation, all revealing what the Drexlers couldn't imagine. BioCoreX wasn't just Ilara's company, it was their company. The blind trust worked perfectly, Ilara continued, indicating a section showing ownership structures. When I established BioCoreX 3 years ago, your investment from the house equity gave you 30% ownership. My work built on your initial support. Silas nodded, memories flowing, working maintenance days and taking night business courses at the community college, building Ilara's first lab table when she was 12, their late-night discussions about enzyme research that led to her breakthrough patents. They think they're acquiring my patents through marriage, Ilara said, disgust evident in her voice. James had me sign what he called a standard prenuptial agreement yesterday, but I recognized it as an intellectual property transfer. I signed with an intentionally different signature that won't hold up legally. Meanwhile, she continued, pointing to another document, we've been acquiring Drexler Corp stock through the blind trust for 18 months. As of last week, we control 22%, combined with the holdings of 3 board members who've lost faith in Richard's leadership. We have effective control, Silas finished quietly. Exactly. Ilara met his eyes directly. Dad, I saw the nameplate. Eleanor texted me. Silas felt a wave of pride mixed with concern. Are you sure you want to do this today? We can wait. Ilara's smile was reminiscent of her mother's, the only trait she'd inherited from the woman who left. They chose the battlefield when they decided my brilliant father was just an obligation. Now they'll learn what you taught me about patience, strategy, and standing up for what's right. She squeezed his hand. I'm not marrying James. I never intended to. This was always about justice, for how they treat their workers, for how they've treated you, and for how they tried to steal my research. While guests filled the ceremony space, Silas met briefly with Professor Jenkins in a quiet alcove off the main hallway. At 72, Jenkins remained sharp and commanding, his presence at the wedding unremarkable as an old family friend, which, in many ways, he was. Everything's in place, Jenkins confirmed quietly. Ms. Winters has the documentation ready for tomorrow's board meeting, which the Drexlers don't yet know has been called, Silas noted. Correct, as a special emergency session requested by 3 board members. Jenkins adjusted his glasses. Your evidence from the maintenance shift provided the final piece. Combined with the whistleblower testimonies from former employees, the safety violations, and the attempted intellectual property appropriation from Ilara, it's overwhelming. Silas nodded. And the regulatory agencies? Representatives will be present via video conference. The SEC has had Drexler Corp. Under investigation for months, but lacked concrete evidence until we provided it. Jenkins checked his watch. The proxy votes are secured. Your position as Ilara's authorized representative is established. At 9 a.m. tomorrow, control of Drexler Corporation will transfer effectively to you and Ilara. A text notification appeared on Silas's phone, from Eleanor, indicating several board members had arrived for the wedding. Another text from Miss Winters confirmed all legal documents were prepared. 28 years of being underestimated, Jenkins mused. While you quietly built knowledge, connections, and leverage, they never saw you, Silas. Not really. People see what they expect to see, Silas replied. A maintenance supervisor doesn't understand corporate governance. A single father can't possibly grasp complex business strategy. A man with calloused hands must have a simple mind. Jenkins smiled slightly. They have no idea who they're really dealing with, do they, Silas? They will, Silas said quietly. By this time tomorrow, they will. The men's dressing room stood empty now, groomsmen having left for pre-ceremony photographs. Only Silas remained, methodically reviewing the key documents one final time before securing them in his inner jacket pocket. The timeline was clear in his mind. Ilara's public stance during the ceremony, their quiet exit, the evening of preparation, and tomorrow's 9 a.m. board meeting. Each phase had specific triggers and responses planned. He checked his phone again. Confirmation from Eleanor that she'd ensure his gift was recovered from the reception table. A message from Mr. Grayson that he'd secured copies of all documentation as backup. A final text from Ms. Winters confirming the regulatory officials were prepared for morning testimony. Everything was in place. Years of patient planning, begun when Ilara first mentioned the Drexlers' interest in her research, now culminating in a single 24-hour period. Silas took out his wallet and looked again at Ilara's graduation photo. His thumb brushed across the image, remembering the pride he'd felt watching her accept her doctorate. She had inherited his methodical mind and patience, but added her own brilliance and vision. Together, they had built something remarkable. Not just a company, but a partnership of mutual respect. The Drexlers had never understood that. They saw only what could be taken, not what could be built. Silas closed his eyes briefly, centering himself in the quiet room. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, for himself, for Ilara, and for every person the Drexlers had diminished and exploited over the years. The wedding coordinator's voice came through the door. "Mr. Matthews, it's time for the ceremony to begin." Silas straightened his tie and looked at his reflection one last time. "For both our dignities," he whispered, then turned toward the door. It was time. The ceremony space hushed as music began. Silas sat in the front row, watching as the procession unfolded with practiced precision. Victoria Drexler dabbed at perfectly dry eyes, while Richard stood proudly erect, nodding to business associates in the audience. When Ilara appeared at the back of the aisle, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the guests. She was radiant, poised, and, to those who knew her well, unmistakably resolute. The ceremony proceeded according to plan, the officiant speaking of union and partnership with practiced eloquence. When the moment came for vows, James Drexler delivered his with the confident smile of a man acquiring a valuable asset. Then came Ilara's turn. She looked at James, then at his parents, and finally to Silas. A slight nod passed between father and daughter. Ilara turned to face the assembled guests. "Before I respond, I'd like to address everyone here." Her voice was clear and strong. "This morning, I discovered something that changed everything. My father's place card at the reception reads, 'Dad by obligation.'" A ripple of confusion moved through the audience. Victoria Drexler stiffened visibly. "For those who don't know my father, Silas Matthews, let me tell you who he is," Ilara continued. "He's the man who raised me alone after my mother left, who worked 2 jobs to fund my education, who built my first laboratory table by hand when I was 12, who never missed a single school event despite exhaustion." She turned to face the Drexlers directly. "He's also the man whose financial support and business guidance helped establish BioCore X, the company whose patents you've been attempting to acquire through this marriage." Gasps and whispers erupted. Richard Drexler stepped forward. "Ilara, you're clearly experiencing wedding nerves." "What I'm experiencing is clarity," she interrupted firmly. "I've seen how you've treated my father, as someone beneath notice, as an obligation to be tolerated. I've discovered your attempts to acquire my research without proper disclosure. And I've witnessed your systematic disrespect for people you consider beneath you." She looked directly at James. "This wedding was never about love. It was about acquiring my company and diminishing my father. I choose dignity over this alliance." With deliberate movements, she removed her engagement ring and placed it in James's stunned hand. "And now, my father and I have a board meeting to prepare for. Tomorrow morning will bring more revelations." Silas stood quietly, his presence beside his daughter speaking volumes. His simple statement, "The nameplate speaks for itself," carried through the shocked silence of the venue. "This is ridiculous!" Richard Drexler's voice boomed across the now chaotic ceremony space. "A simple misunderstanding about a place card that my wife personally verified yesterday," James interjected unwisely, before catching his father's warning glance. Victoria Drexler moved forward, tears now miraculously flowing. "Ilara, darling, I had no idea about the nameplate. A horrible mistake by the printing company, surely. A mistake that perfectly aligned with how you've treated him at every interaction," Ilara replied calmly. "The seating arrangements, the program that listed him only as father of the bride without a name, the consistent dismissal of his presence." James stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "Do you understand what you're doing? My father can destroy your career with one phone call. No research institution will touch you." Silas maintained his position beside Ilara, neither gloating nor retreating. His calm presence contrasted sharply with the Drexlers' growing agitation. "I understand precisely what I'm doing," Ilara replied, her voice steady. "And as for my career, BioCore X is already well established, with research partners across 3 continents. Eleanor moved through the crowd to stand with Silas and Ilara. Professor Jenkins, watching from nearby, made a pointed comment to a group of guests about the ethics of corporate leadership reflecting personal character. Several guests nodded in understanding, while others watched with the avid interest of witnesses to a social spectacle. Victoria made one final attempt, her voice honeyed with false concern. "Ilara, please, think about your future. The connections our family provides, the opportunities—" "I have all the connection I need," Ilara interrupted, taking her father's arm, "and my future is secure, more than you realize." She addressed the stunned gathering. I apologize to our guests for the inconvenience. The truth, however uncomfortable, seemed preferable to a marriage founded on deception. As they turned to leave, Ilara added clearly, "And now we have a board meeting to prepare for. Tomorrow morning will bring more revelations." The garden that had provided Silas sanctuary earlier now became their impromptu war room. Ilara had changed from her wedding gown into a business suit she'd presciently stored in her car, looking every bit the CEO she had become. From a nearby window, they could see Richard Drexler shouting into his phone, gesticulating furiously. His words carried faintly. "Cancel the board meeting immediately." "I don't care what Robert says, I'm the chairman." Victoria Drexler could be seen working her own phone, moving rapidly between groups of departing guests, clearly attempting damage control. "They're scrambling," Eleanor observed, joining them with Silas's gift box in hand. "Victoria's already spinning a story about Ilara having a nervous breakdown from pre-wedding stress." "And James is contacting your business partners," Professor Jenkins added, approaching with his own phone. "Attempting to suggest you've become unstable and unreliable." Ilara nodded calmly. "Exactly as we anticipated." She turned to her father. "We need to accelerate our timeline. They'll try to block the board meeting or manipulate stock overnight." Silas considered this, then made his decision. "Send the documentation to all board members now, not in the morning. Contact Miss Winters and have her file the regulatory submissions immediately. And activate our media contingency." Jenkins nodded and stepped away to make calls. "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked. "That's the nuclear option." "They've already escalated," Silas replied, watching Richard Drexler through the window, now arguing with what appeared to be his legal counsel. "They'll use every resource they have to maintain control. We need to move decisively." Ilara's phone buzzed with notifications. 3 business publications just reached out for comment about rumors of leadership changes at Drexler Corp. The word is already spreading. Several business associates who had attended the wedding approached their garden sanctuary, offering quiet support. One, a venture capitalist who had initially funded BioCore X, clasped Silas's hand firmly. "Always knew there was more to you than met the eye, Matthews," he said with genuine respect. "Most people see what they expect to see," Silas replied simply. As they prepared to leave, Silas paused to look back at the venue, the elaborate decorations, the confused guests, the frantic Drexlers. None of this was what he had imagined for Ilara's wedding day. Yet watching her now, confident and purposeful, he knew they were on the right path. "They've had years of power," he told Ilara as they walked to the car. "Now they'll learn what real strength looks like." The Drexler Corporation boardroom projected power through every detail: gleaming mahogany table, leather chairs, portraits of 3 generations of Drexler men watching from the walls. At precisely 9 a.m., those same walls witnessed something unprecedented in the company's history. Silas Matthews sat at the head of the table. Around him, 14 board members watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled satisfaction. Richard Drexler stood at the far end, face flushed with anger, his attempts to cancel the emergency session having failed. Victoria and James remained near the door, as if planning a quick escape. On screens positioned around the room, representatives from the SEC, OSHA, and the Patent Office observed silently. The executive assistant recorded minutes with meticulous care. "This meeting is completely unauthorized," Richard began, his voice strained. "As chairman, as of 7 a.m. this morning, you are no longer chairman," interrupted board member Roberts, sliding documents forward. "The proxy votes have been verified by independent counsel." Ms. Winters, a composed woman in her 40s, stood beside Silas. For the record, combined holdings of Matthews Trust, BioCoreX Holdings, and supporting board members now control 57% of voting shares. That's impossible, Richard sputtered. No one holds that much Drexler stock outside our family. Apparently someone does, Mrs. Winters replied evenly, distributing documentation to all present. The Matthews Trust has been systematically acquiring shares for 18 months, all properly reported to the SEC, but obscured through legal blind trust mechanisms. Silas spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the same quiet authority it always had. The first order of business is a vote for interim leadership while investigations proceed. All in favor of appointing Silas Matthews as acting chairman, please indicate by raising your hand. One by one, hands rose around the table. 8, 9, 10 members. A clear majority. Richard Drexler watched with growing horror as control slipped away before his eyes. This is outrageous. You can't possibly understand how to run this company. You're a maintenance man. A maintenance man who spent 5 years taking night courses in business management, Silas corrected calmly. A maintenance man who helped build a biotech company now valued at over $300 million. A maintenance man who saw how you treated your employees and your family. He gestured to the screens where regulatory officials waited. A maintenance man who had access to evidence of safety violations, worker exploitation, and attempted intellectual property theft. The vote count was final, 11 in favor, 3 against. Silas Matthews was now chairman of Drexler Corporation. The evidence is irrefutable, Miss Winters continued, as documents appeared on the boardroom screens. Systematic safety violations at 3 manufacturing facilities, worker compensation deliberately miscalculated to reduce payments, regulatory reports falsified to avoid compliance costs. Each board member had received a comprehensive dossier containing evidence Silas had methodically collected during his maintenance shifts. Photographs, copies of internal memos, testimonials from former employees who had been silenced through aggressive non-disclosure agreements. This is a witch hunt, Richard protested, but his voice had lost conviction as several board members openly distanced themselves from his position, moving their chairs slightly away. Mr. Drexler, we have 7 former employees prepared to testify, said the OSHA representative from her screen, and documented evidence of retaliatory firings when safety concerns were raised. Furthermore, continued the SEC representative, the attempted acquisition of BioCoreX intellectual property through marriage without proper disclosure to Miss Matthews represents a serious breach of securities regulations. James Drexler paled visibly. That was just a standard prenuptial agreement. That coincidentally transferred all patent rights to Drexler subsidiaries, Ilara responded, speaking for the first time. Without disclosing your family's financial interest in my research. Board member Stevenson, who had initially seemed skeptical, now addressed Silas directly. I've worked with this company for 15 years. These allegations are disturbing, but even more concerning is how easily control was transferred. How did this happen without our knowledge? Silas nodded, acknowledging the fair question. While Mr. Drexler was looking down on me as just a janitor, I was looking at his books. I observed his operations. I documented his decisions, and I connected with board members who shared concerns about the company's direction. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Richard Drexler's growing agitation. When people underestimate you, they speak freely in your presence. They leave documents unsecured. They reveal their true character. Roberts, the board member who had initiated the emergency session, added, "Several of us have been concerned about ethical lapses for years. but lacked concrete evidence until Mr. Matthews provided it. Outside the boardroom, media representatives had begun gathering, alerted by press releases from Messieurs. Winter's office detailing the leadership change. Business partners were already distancing themselves from Richard Drexler, calls going unanswered, support suddenly unavailable. The truth, once revealed, spread with unstoppable momentum. "This is nothing short of corporate theft," Richard Drexler declared, making a final stand. "You've manipulated the system, turned my board against me, and stolen my family's company." Silas remained seated, projecting calm authority from the chairman's position. "No, Mr. Drexler. I've used legitimate business methods to gain control of a company that was being mismanaged, the same methods you've used against others for decades." He gestured to the dossiers before each board member. "The difference is that my actions have been legal and ethical. I didn't create false evidence. I simply documented what was already happening." Richard's face flushed deeper. "How dare you lecture me on ethics? You're nobody. A maintenance man who got lucky." "That's where you've always been wrong," Silas replied evenly. "A person's worth isn't determined by their job title or family name, but by their character and actions." The board members watched this exchange with rapt attention, the power dynamic visibly shifting with each word. "I demand to know how this happened," Richard insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "How did you acquire so much Drexler stock without my knowledge?" "The same way you acquired so many companies, patiently, strategically, and legally," Silas answered. "The difference is, I did it while being systematically underestimated." He stood now, his posture straight and dignified. "Mr. Drexler, you have a choice. You can sign the transition documents voluntarily, acknowledging the legitimate transfer of control, or we can proceed with the regulatory investigations with you actively opposing the process." Miss Winters placed the documents before Richard. "The first option preserves some dignity and allows for a negotiated separation package. The second likely ends in regulatory penalties and possible criminal charges." The room fell silent as Richard Drexler faced the choice before him. Decades of entitlement and authority confronted by the consequences of his actions. With trembling hands, he signed the documents. "This company will now be run with the same principles I used to raise my daughter," Silas stated, addressing the entire board. "Respect, integrity, and recognition of every person's dignity, beginning with how we treat our employees." The nameplate at the head of the table already showed the change. Silas Matthews, acting chairman. Silas sat in his home office, surrounded by an incongruous mix of maintenance manuals and corporate documents. 3 days had passed since the boardroom confrontation, and the business world was still reverberating with the story of how a maintenance man had outmaneuvered one of the city's most powerful families. Elara sat across from him, reviewing transition plans on her tablet. "The stock has actually increased 8% since the announcement," she noted. "The market apparently approves of ethical leadership." "And how are you?" Silas asked, studying his daughter's face. "This wasn't the wedding day I imagined for you." Elara smiled, setting aside her tablet. "I wasn't marrying for love, Dad. You knew that." "I suspected," he acknowledged, "but I wanted you to have the choice. I made my choice long ago, to build something meaningful, not to advance through marriage." Her expression softened. "The question is, what do we do about the Drexlers now?" Silas considered this carefully. The immediate crisis had passed. Richard had stepped down, Regulatory investigations were proceeding, and the company was stabilizing under new leadership. We proceed with reforms, but without vengeance, he decided. They've lost control of their company and their reputation. That's consequence enough without destroying them completely. They would have destroyed you without hesitation, Ilara pointed out. Which is precisely why we won't do the same, Silas replied. We establish appropriate boundaries and requirements, but we don't become what we opposed. His phone rang continuously with media requests, business inquiries, and even potential publishers interested in his rags to riches story, a characterization that made him uncomfortable. It wasn't about getting rich, he explained to Ilara. It was about ensuring fairness and respect. She nodded, understanding. What happens now, with the company? Silas looked at the draft proposal he'd been preparing. I think it's time Drexler Corporation became something more than a family dynasty, something that benefits all who contribute to its success. 1 month later, Silas stood in the renovated company cafeteria, now serving the same quality food to all employees regardless of position. Workers from every department filled the tables, the previous divisions between executives and staff deliberately dismantled. The changes we're implementing aren't just about fairness, Silas explained to the gathered employees. They're about recognizing that every person's contribution matters to our success. He moved comfortably through the room, greeting maintenance workers by name, stopping to discuss family photos with administrative staff, listening to production line concerns with genuine interest. Mr. Matthews, a young maintenance technician, approached hesitantly. I've been taking night courses in engineering, but couldn't afford to continue. Your new education program means I can finish my degree. Silas recognized himself in the young man's determined eyes. What's your name? Miguel Vasquez, sir. The education benefit exists because knowledge shouldn't be limited by job title, Silas told him. When I was taking business courses while working maintenance, no one believed I could understand corporate strategy. They were wrong. He placed a hand on Miguel's shoulder. Intelligence and capability exist at every level of this company. My job is to remove barriers, not create them. The new corporate values document, prominently displayed throughout the building, emphasized respect, integrity, and dignity for all. More importantly, these values were reflected in concrete policies, safety investments, fair compensation, educational opportunities, and decision-making input from workers at all levels. Some see patience as weakness, Silas told the management team later that day. But strategic patience allowed us to build something better than what existed before. The most significant change, however, was the newly established profit-sharing program, ensuring all employees benefited from the company's success, a radical departure from the previous model, where wealth concentrated at the top. A company isn't just its executives or shareholders, Silas explained when questioned by business reporters. It's every person who contributes daily to its operation. Our success should be shared accordingly. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, Silas and Ilara sat on his front porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and purple. The familiar creaking of the chains provided a comforting rhythm to their conversation. The Drexlers have reached out again, Ilara mentioned, sipping her tea. James wants to meet. Says he's been doing some serious reflection. Silas nodded thoughtfully. People can change when confronted with consequences. Not always, but sometimes. Do you think we should hear him out? She asked. With clear boundaries, yes, Silas replied. Redemption should be possible, even for those who've caused harm. Otherwise, what's the point of consequences? The company transformation had exceeded their expectations. Productivity had increased with improved working conditions. Innovation flourished as employees at all levels were encouraged to contribute ideas. Most significantly, the culture had shifted from fear and hierarchy to collaboration and mutual respect. The legal entity was now transitioning to a benefit corporation structure, with a significant portion of profits directed to community development and education initiatives. "Your workshop is gathering dust," Ilara observed, nodding toward the small shed where he'd spent countless hours repairing things and building projects for her throughout childhood. "I've been busy," Silas acknowledged with a smile. "But I miss working with my hands." "The Workers' Education Center needs someone to teach basic repair skills," Ilara suggested. "Something about learning self-sufficiency and the dignity of maintaining what you own." Silas considered this. "I might enjoy that." A comfortable silence fell between them, the kind that exists only between people who truly understand each other. "Dad," Ilara said finally, "Professor Jenkins thinks we should document what happened, not just for accountability, but to help others who face similar situations." Silas had resisted previous suggestions to tell his story, uncomfortable with attention and publicity. "People need to know that dignity doesn't come from titles or wealth," Ilara continued. "That patience isn't the same as weakness. That standing up for your worth doesn't require becoming like those who dismissed you." She took his hand, her expression earnest. "Your story could help others who face disrespect and dismissal." Silas looked out at the horizon, considering her words. His journey from maintenance worker to corporate chairman wasn't about personal ambition. It was about establishing that every person deserves respect, regardless of position or background. Perhaps that was a message worth sharing. "Are you ready to tell your story to help others, Dad?" Ilara asked softly. Silas squeezed her hand and nodded. "For the right reasons, yes." Dignity isn't granted by titles or wealth. It's maintained through integrity and cultivated through consistent character, sometimes revealed most clearly when others try to diminish it. In a world that often confuses net worth with human worth, remembering this truth becomes an act of quiet rebellion. How many times have you felt dismissed because of your age, occupation, or appearance? How often have contributions been minimized, wisdom ignored, or sacrifice taken for granted? These experiences are painfully common, particularly as we age in a society that worships youth and novelty. The sting of such dismissal is real, cutting to the core of our sense of self. Yet there is power in being underestimated, a strategic advantage that Silas understood. When people look past you, they reveal themselves fully, unguarded and authentic. They display their true character, priorities, and weaknesses. In patience and careful observation lies the foundation for reclaiming respect on your own terms. The quiet dignity that refuses to descend into bitterness or revenge ultimately reveals true strength of character, not in grand gestures or public confrontations, but in methodical, principled actions that establish boundaries while maintaining integrity. This is wisdom earned through experience, the understanding that how we respond to disrespect determines who we become. Look around at the invisible pillars in your own community, those whose consistent, honorable actions uphold others without recognition or acclaim. The maintenance workers who ensure buildings function properly. The administrative staff who keep organizations running smoothly. The caregivers whose labor is essential yet undervalued. Their dignity doesn't depend on recognition, but our recognition of their dignity reflects our own character. In honoring their contributions, we create communities where worth is measured by integrity, not status, a legacy of respect that benefits generations to come.